Thank you very much for joining us. This is a moment when white people need to listen and follow the lead of the Black community. The anger and pain and grief over the murder of George Floyd is overwhelming. And I know that many of you want to know what you can do to help, to participate in the solution and do it in a good way. All communities have a role to play. This is a unique moment. I don't think ever before in American history have peaceful protests taken place in over 50 states. And we have to work together to take this anger and this pain and this grief and transform it into a revolution that will set us all free from white supremacy, which is at the root of this and so many other forms of destruction. If you believe that Black lives matter, and I know that you do, you have to take this moment, I do, we all do, to listen to the Black community. So Fire Drill Fridays is grateful that today we're going to hear from 3 leaders of the movement for Black lives about what this means, how we can support the movement, and how we must all work together to end systemic racism. As we listen to what these leaders are going to tell us, I urge all of you who've been part of the Fire Drill Fridays community to keep in mind things that we've learned over these many months together. We learned about a 1987 report called Toxic Wastes and Race in the United States, which documented clearly that communities of color and low-income communities, indigenous communities, are more likely to host hazardous waste facilities. This is done deliberately. That's what the report made clear. And the companies responsible for these communities who have their facilities that are polluting these communities call the communities sacrifice zones. I remember when I first learned that. I hope you're as shocked as I was. As a result, the people who live there are disproportionately polluted, experiencing disproportionately high levels of health impacts, and even worse, these communities are excluded from any decision-making about the facilities that are impacting their lives. As a result of this, and because these communities often lack food, they're food deserts, they're health clinic deserts, the people who live there often lack health insurance. Because of all this, Black people, people of color are twice as likely to die from COVID-19. According to the CDC, 1/3 of coronavirus infections nationwide have affected Black people. 1/3 of those who have died of the virus in this country are Black. In other words, violence against Black people here in the United States takes many forms, and it has existed for many, many centuries. We need to dismantle the systems that exploit people and the planet. And a core part of that is the fight for justice every single day. We can never create a green and peaceful future if systems of white supremacy, colonialism, and privilege continue to destroy the environment and strip Black communities of their dignity and too often their lives. We at Fire Drill Fridays are 100% in alignment with that. And that's why we know that a commitment to justice has to be at the core of our work to advance climate solutions, but also to build an inclusive, resilient, safe, and just country for everyone. The movement for Black lives has called for a week of action, and we're heeding that call. And therefore, before I introduce our guests, though, I just want to acknowledge the fact that today, June 5th, Brianna Taylor would have turned 27 had her life not been cut short when 3 police officers entered her home and shot her. All 3 of those officers are walking free today. No charges have been filed. So let's all please take a few moments today to think about Brianna and demand justice for her. And we're linking resources around that in the chat. And now I want to welcome Colette Pichon Battle, Jessica Byrd, and Chinyere Tutashinda. Thank you very much for being with us today. And I'd like each of you to introduce yourselves to our audience and tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing. And can we start with you, Colette?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jane, for this opportunity. Peace, everyone. My name is Colette Pichon Battle. I'm the Executive Director of the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy. We're located in Louisiana, and we work throughout the Gulf South, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. We work specifically with communities of color on the front line of climate change, and we work to create structural shifts so that we can make changes in our society, in our policy, and in our laws so that we can build a more sustainable future. This moment is really tough for the Gulf South right now as we're getting ready for a tidal surge that comes with a tropical depression on top of the COVID-19 pandemic, on top of the protests and resistance that are moving right now. But we know that the South is vital. If there's going to be any change to the nation, it'll have to come from here. Excited to be on the call today. Thank you.
Jessica?
Peace, everyone. My name is Jessica Byrd. Thank you, Jane, for having us and for that beautiful opening. I lead a political consulting firm, or I'm one of the leaders of 3 Point Strategies, which is a Black women-led and owned political consulting firm that is lovingly called the electoral firm of the movement. Together with the Movement for Black Lives, we created the Electoral Justice Project, which was specifically to build a bridge between the tactic of the ballot box and voting to the structure that so many of us believe has to be dismantled, interrogated, and rebuilt. And so I join you with those hat on as a person who's been positively addicted to elections and who also believes that we need a structural analysis in order to create the pathways to both political power, transformative public policy, and the change that our communities deserve. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for that. Can one of you explain to our audience what exactly the Movement for Black Lives is? Or have I missed somebody? Is there a third?
Oh no, this is perfect for Chin to jump in.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, Jane, and to the Fire Drill Friday team. Really honored to be here. My name is Chinyere Tutashinda. I am one of the co-founders and co-directors of the BlackOut Collective. We are a Black direct action organization. We support communities on the ground with action support, training, ideation, and as we like to call it, deep space visioning, really thinking about how we use action and protest in support of Black liberation. So yes, I'm happy I can kind of just go straight into your next question. So the Movement for Black Lives. We are, or what we like to call ourselves, as an ecosystem, which means that there are many different organizations that all kind of make up the Movement for Black Lives. So we're a coalition, but beyond, we understand that there's so many different types of organizations that need to be a part of this work and of Black liberation struggle. So we have groups that just focus on policy, groups that are really thinking about our electoral work, like Jessica talked about, groups that are just focused on really thinking about how are we engaging masses? How are we thinking about our communications? There are groups that are just thinking about resources and how do we get resources to the field and resources for this work. And then we have whole groups of organizations that just do organizing and field work on the ground. So we understand as a large-based coalition that we have to have many different kinds of organizations that will help get us to liberation and really get us to where we say we want to go in a more just society.
Thank you for that. And I'd like to know, and I think our audience would like to know, what is the movement's most immediate demands? Right now, immediate.
So I can jump in, and I'd love for Colette and Chin to join in with me here. Our most immediate demand is to defund the police. What we mean when we say defund the police is that every community has a budget that includes the pay of the police department and the resources that they receive in order to patrol the community. Most of those budgets also are going to the terror tactics and the violence that our communities see now. Our mayors, our city councils, in some places you have a county council or a county executive, they make those budgets. We're asking now that everyone demand that they look at the line item that the budget includes for the police in their community, and demand that those resources be redistributed to the health, the safety, the wellness, and the thriving of Black people in those communities. And so it used to be that saying defund was considered radical. We're clear now, and the people are with us, that it's standard. If a system does not work for us and the taxpayers pay the budget of that system, then we change it and reimagine it for the structure that it actually should be, which is connected to the community safety practices that the citizens should demand. So that's our number one demand. Each day this week, we have named a version of uplifting that demand, protecting protesters, demanding community control, getting police out of schools. All of that is connected to our belief that by naming that our taxpayer dollars fuel a system of violence and control, that we can get to the solution of thriving and community safety. Anyone who wants to engage more deeply in our demands can go to defendblacklives.org, where you can see not only everything fleshed out, but you can also sign on to those demands and connect locally to how your community should relate to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
so,
and I want to...
Yeah, go on.
I want to agree with Jessica on the first level of demand, and I also want to point out that prior to these murders that have been coming to light, the Movement for Black Lives had COVID demands as well, and I just want to take a minute to lift them up. There was a massive call for no water shutoffs, no electricity shutoffs, especially in places like Flint and Detroit, where we're seeing folks still have trouble accessing water. There's a demand to release people out of prisons, especially when they were held on misdemeanors or awaiting trial, sort of a death sentence if they're stuck in these jails. And then we also wanted to make sure that electricity, water wasn't shut off, internet was made available as the sort of society shift goes toward the internet, and realizing that Black communities, in particular poor communities, rural communities, don't have access to the internet. So while defunding the police is the major ask around this moment, it's on top of asks that we had put out dealing with the COVID pandemic.
And I believe that part of the demand is to defund the police and invest that money in the community, right?
Right.
So a white person in a town somewhere who wanted to do more than sign your petition and march with you, how could they actually do more than that?
Yes.
And how easy is it to access the budget of the local police force?
Yeah, so there are quite a few resources online. And on our website soon, we will have different ways to be able to access that and get information. But currently, if there are white people or even other non-Black people, people of color, there are so many different spaces where police officers are contracted that we can look at, like, where you are, whether that's at your school, the university in your neighborhood, or even just the grocery store. Right? Being able to contact local communities, look at these demands and see, how can I make this real in my life? Mm-hmm. What does this look like in my community? Where currently are police? What is their budget? And where do we know that we actually don't need police officers or people who are armed and licensed to kill you in these spaces, right? So if we're talking about community safety, there are so many other ways that we can envision that, and we don't need police officers in these spaces. So you can go and identify those locations in your community, and very often there is an organization that's already working on that. So I ask that you can find those organizations. So the people who are calling for the protests in your community are probably still some of the community groups that have been working on this issue for a really long time, and we can join them.
Yeah.
I would just add in, you know, guilt is not the motivator here. And if there are our white allies who are standing up and standing with us because they feel guilty, while that might be a convincing motivator for folks, it's not the right one. Rage is a good motivator right now, but mostly what should be motivating our white allies is the concept of shared liberation. The movement for Black Lives does not exist to only help Black people. The movement for Black Lives exists because if you do not start here, you will not make systemic and long-lasting change for anyone. And what white allies ought to see from this is that we have a policing and a militarized system that can come into your home, that can put its knee on your neck, that can take things from you. And if you don't understand that letting this go means it can happen to you, then you might have the wrong motivation. I would really encourage our white allies to take a moment to think about what it means to equate your life to Black life, what it means to value your life the way Black lives are valued. And I think we've got to create some internal shifts for folks. And this moment is the moment to do it. But we've got to create some of those internal shifts and not just show up and, you know, say words that you don't understand, but really take some time to think about what it is to have our lives valued the same.
Thank you for that, Colette. That's beautiful. Thank you.
I would also name that there are two organizations. Oh, I was going to name, when thinking about the role of white people, there are also a few organizations that are national organizations that are doing amazing work, really specifically with white people. So Surge, showing up for racial justice, there might be one in your community. And then if you look online at the Catalyst Project, they do a lot of information about unlearning white supremacy and unlearning racism that could be very helpful in this moment. And then definitely want to uplift the work of the Rising Majority, which is a multiracial space, and Working Families Party.
Thank you. I'm really curious, and this is for the three of you. Do you feel that this moment that we're experiencing is different? And if so, how?
Yes. I'll start I think it's different for a few reasons, and a few layered ones as well. One is, I think we've learned a lot. I think that Black movement has really learned a lot and has done the hard work of engaging deeply with each other, of building a connected ecosystem, of experimenting with practices where we live, experimenting with electoral power, experimenting with public policy, and that we've brought that back to this current assessment that defund is the only way that we can truly get to a next step solution. I would also say that that organizing in opposition of a fascist regime, and in particular an empowered white nationalist network, is also different. That during Ferguson and Baltimore and those incredibly powerful years that politicized me very deeply, that yes, there were huge mistakes and inactions by the Obama administration and local elected officials, and missed opportunities. And that is specifically different than engaging with a president who not only was elected based on the vitriol of racism and white nationalism, but has also empowered the federal government, the Justice Department, the Army, and the police to become militarized. He is on video, on tape, saying, hurt them, dominate them. You need to dominate them. The only way that we beat them is to dominate them. And so that is specifically different, both in structure, in narrative, and based in the way that we have found ourselves protecting ourselves while protesting in this moment. I will also say here before my colleagues join is just the narrative could not feel more clear to me, to members of my family, to people who have been engaged in this particular conversation around Black Lives Matter and police violence and racial injustice, who have said like, well, but what could we do? What is even possible? How could we change this? Like, it all feels so big, you know, why can't the people just stop shooting unarmed folks? Like, there are these questions that have felt without a solution and almost too big to tackle for some. But I actually think what I'm experiencing and what through the exhaustion and the anger and the fatigue around the racism, what their motivation that energizes me is that I am hearing people say, I get exactly what you all are saying. I get that what you're saying is that this system is specifically designed to dominate and control. That the police are given weapons, not just because they might need them, but because they are intended to use them as fear-based tactics. That public policy allows that there is a specific way in which white nationalist organizations have been empowered. And I get that what you're saying has to be as clear as possible. I think that is a huge victory. It's a huge shift, and it changes the conditions at which Black people can lead and demand the change that we need. And so for anyone who's listening who it may still be engaging in that dialogue, I encourage you to listen to Black people's voices as we say, we have done this work. We have made these demands intentionally, not to just be the most radical kids on the block. No, we named them because they are truly backed by the science, by the morality, and by the requirements of Black people in this moment.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that, Jessica. And, you know, what a great question, Jane. You know, I was politicized in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in 2005. We'll be commemorating 15 years since Hurricane Katrina on August 29th in New Orleans this year. And what I know about this moment, I know from that crisis and the 15 years of recovery and rebuilding that come from that. Not just the hit, but the series of hits that I know are coming, many of us know are still yet to come. It feels eerily familiar. The rage, the trauma, even the sort of rush to get dollars to companies instead of dollars to people, watching billions of dollars go to fossil fuel companies while folks are looking at that $1,200 check a month ago that just didn't, you know, wasn't enough to do much. This is exactly how it played out in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. The resources never hit the ground. Justice was never served, and the recovery that happened was not for the people who were here before. I fear that in this moment, and I fear our likelihood to replicate that. But there's a major change here that we cannot lose sight of. And it is the center of our work of the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy, which is we are now fighting this battle with this administration and this society during a global pandemic. And while the international community of conservative scientists give us now 10 years before we reach the point of no return and the climate reality that we will all be facing. The tropical storm that's in the Gulf right now is an indication of what we're in for. NASA, national organizations have said this is going to be a hard year. The temperatures in the Gulf waters are already higher. The planet is warming up. There is a real climate emergency on top of massive social change. I don't know that anyone's ever seen this moment before. And I think it's time for those who are working on climate to understand that climate justice and ecological equity will require us to all dig deep into racial justice and learn how to follow the leadership of Black and Indigenous people who are on the front lines.
Yeah, thank you, Colette. Thank you.
I think
I was
one of the
struck.
things- oh, no,
Excuse
no,
me. Go ahead.
no, please go.
I was struck at the George Floyd Memorial yesterday. Well, I cried at Reverend Al Sharpton's eulogy. It was very powerful and very beautiful. And he said, this is the first time in our history that in 50 states, there are ongoing peaceful, the protests are, for the most part, are peaceful and very diverse. And some of them are taking place in largely white communities, holding up signs, Black Lives Matter. This is new, I think. And as you say, I think a lot of it has to do with the incredible maturity and work of the movement for Black Lives and all the organizations that make up a part of that. One of your demands is for immediate relief for your communities. And as you know, there are $1 trillion COVID-19 relief packages going through Congress. Of course, the majority of the money tends to go to big business, including the fossil fuel companies. If your communities could directly access some of the relief funding, what would your priorities be for how to use it?
Yes. I love that question because it's around envisioning a world where our needs are met and our communities get what they need. So there are solutions for health and healthcare, being able to really meet people's healthcare needs in a moment, and particularly when we're looking at the pandemic, being able to infuse into job programs and green jobs work, looking at education, right? If we're looking at schools that are predominantly Black, we know that they are also underfunded. So being able to give money to schools, being able to give access and support higher education along with that, communities access to homes and to housing. We have a housing and homeless crisis in this country, and it is not because we do not have enough homes. It is because of the way that the system works. So being able to put people in homes currently, right? So there's like things that feel very basic and simple, but these are the things that our people need, and access to food. Like you mentioned earlier, Jane, that a lot of communities are places where there are food apartheids and they are not able to get food in their communities that is healthy and fresh, and have access to wonderful grocery stores. So being able to put resources towards that would be amazing.
Anybody want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'd love to chime in. You know, this is an excellent opportunity for federal dollars to go into our infrastructure, the infrastructure across the United States, including the infrastructure that brings us our water and our energy. But we don't want an investment in infrastructure that will maintain these monopolies. Instead, we want investment that will lead us to community control of our own energy, our own natural resources, and even our own internet, which is a public space that we should be able to control and have access for people. I would mention that the water crisis in this country during a pandemic that requires us to wash our hands and even come back into wellness through the drinking of water requires us to address that 77 million Americans have water that has a violation of the Safe Drinking Water Act. This is found in the Water Equity and Climate Resilience Caucus report that has gone to Congress. We have a problem not just for Black people. This is a problem for America, but investing in the water infrastructure not only can guarantee us clean and safe drinking water that is affordable, but it can also put millions of people to work. Why are we putting people to work in these industries that are accelerating the climate crisis, that are causing more harm, why not put these dollars into infrastructure that help us build sustainable communities that can withstand this climate crisis and put people to work into something that we all kind of need to know. How do we preserve our water system? How do we make water accessible to folks? This is pieces of information that should be democratized for everyone. So there's a real opportunity right now for this country, no matter what side you're on, to put those dollars into the investment of our infrastructure, especially our water infrastructure and our food infrastructure.
Hear, hear. Thank you.
That's absolutely beautiful. I actually just want to be a cheerleader for Colette for a hot second, because I know so many of the folks that you are organizing with come to their politics through the environmental justice. And she has done some incredible work. And I hope that people engage with it deeply. Look up her TED Talk. I know that's corny to name, but there is a lot right now. Black people, in particular Black women, are missing from the environmental justice conversation at a national level. We are so grateful that we have Colette and many others who are engaged in environmental justice where we live. But we want those folks to be lifted up in their expertise and in their solutions as well.
Bravo, Colette. As a white person, I would like to know how you feel that people who are not Black, people who are outside your community, what's the best way that we can help specifically right now?
Well, I might be a little controversial on this one, but I'm a Southern Black woman, so here it goes. I think folks need to actually see the spiritual significance of this moment. I come from a place and a tradition that tells me a moment like this is as much about the spiritual warfare as it is about our physical safety and our actual liberation. And so it's time for folks to actually take a minute and really, I'll say the word meditate. In my word, I would say the word pray. To really think about this and pray about this and pray about what your role is. And after you've cleared your head and really rooted yourself in your own culture and your own tradition, not my culture, not my tradition, but yours. When you root yourself in your own tradition and you get clear about your role, it's time to act. And action cannot be just social media. It's gotta be something greater than that. I often hear my white friends tell me about their very difficult father or their difficult uncle or the dinner table that they don't want to bring it up around. And then they bring that back to the Black community, to sort of soothe them. But let me tell you something. Every day of my life, I've had to have hard conversations. Every day of my life, I've had to have hard conversations that I didn't want to have, but out of love and out of a desire to see change, we have to be able to engage in that. At the very least, it's time for my white friends to engage in hard conversations, and it will be difficult and there will be fallout, but there could also be learning, and there can also be this sort of reassessment that folks might not get in the moment, but will get if someone they love challenges them to think a different way. And then finally, I say it's time to support some of these Black organizations that are on the ground that have to beg for dollars in order to stay afloat. But these organizations are going to save all of us. It's time to, if you are the kind of person who donates, it's time to donate not just to the big organizations, but the little ones in your community that have been there for a very long time, making sure that things happen. So those are some suggestions for white allies. We're going to need everyone to win this. We're going to need everyone to win on climate, but it's going to require a little humility and the ability to learn how to follow Black leadership. It's not something we all have. We're going to have to unlearn a lot of stuff to learn how to do that following.
Yes. And can I add that also, from my experience, and that will not be similar to every place that people are uprising right now. So I want to name that. But for myself, I've also noticed that has been a change since 2014 and 2015. I have experienced white people showing up differently. That is so encouraging. I've watched white people show up into protest and know for sure that they were planning to get arrested first, know for sure that they intended to cover the body of a Black person who I could see the clarity that if I go first, I will probably experience less harm than the person that I'm here to defend and protect. That should not go unnamed, because that is part of this revolution, is that we are consistently asking ourselves to name the truth. And if the truth for sure is that that Black people are at more risk and harm when in the presence of police, then that invites a solution. Then my body becomes a place. It is not to invite everyone, obviously, into the violence of the police, but it's that acknowledgement. And then one thing here that I also want to name is that, continuing to decenter yourself from this conversation. I have still been so disappointed by national organizations, talking heads, individuals who still are asking Black people questions and trying to poke holes through our demands and our vision for our own future. But why would you protest like this? But why not say this? I guess, why wouldn't you ask for this one reform? I don't know. It just kind of seems like if none of the stores had gotten their windows broken, that maybe people would be listening to you all. And I encourage you to do that, your own management, your self-management of poking holes through, as if our lives are a political theory. They're not. We're telling you we're being murdered. And when we go outside of our homes, that we are at all times preventing a murder from happening, or violence or risk from happening. And so when we say to you, the way you could change this and invite you into the change, then that actually isn't up for debate, even if that there are parts of our local organizing that should always be in conversation about the strategy. But to continue to expect that we defend not just our lives, but our solutions and our demands is in many ways the central part of white supremacy, and why we haven't been able to make the racialized progress that we so desperately need in this country.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. When I engage with friends and colleagues about racism, and oftentimes they'll say, well, I'm not racist. And one of the big learning curves, I think, for us is, the point is not, are you racist or not racist? Automatically, because we're white, we are privileged in all kinds of ways. And I've put some books that have helped me understand it a lot into the social media posts from here. But what I've learned is, it's not enough to say you're not racist. What needs to happen is to be an anti-racist.
Yes, that's
right. And that means a move from thinking about it or saying or writing in social media to actually taking action. Could you all talk about that?
Yes.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. I think that it's such a powerful acknowledgement, and to hear that from you, Jane, really excited around that, because it's so true. I've had similar conversations with some of my friends who are white, and it's a difficult one. It's a difficult one, I imagine, to be able to hear that just because we live in the system, there's so much that you don't see, aren't aware of, and don't know, and having to really pull the blinders back is what I've been told, is that's the process. It's a process of unlearning. It's a process of being actively an anti-racist in our actions, right? And there are organizations that are amazing at some of that work. Again, Surge is a really good one, showing up for racial justice. And then so is the Catalyst Project. They're really good anti-racist organizations. And through that, through white people acting and enacting, it means that I can trust you. It means that I see you and I know that you are doing your work. So I have a yoga teacher of mine who put out a post recently and shared, what does it mean to be an anti-racist? What does that look like within the yoga community? What does that look like where you're at? So what that signals for me is like, I know that when I show up in your class or when I show up with you and we say that we are comrades, I know that I can trust you. I know that when you say and you share a post that says that I stand with the movement for Black lives and Black Lives Matter, that you mean that. You mean that beyond the post, because you are reading, because you are unlearning, because you're having those difficult conversations. She's having those difficult conversations with her father and her brother-in-law, who are police officers, right? And they are hard, but they are so necessary. And the first one, they might not hear you, and that's okay. Because we know that we can continue to come back to it over and over again. And one of the things that is really, that I like to give as an offering and as a gift, is knowing that if you have friends who are Black, who are people of color, you being a true friend to them is doing that work for yourself, right? And doing that work for your people. You may love them, you may have that, but we all know that we have our bias, we have racism. We live in a white supremacist society, right, that is built on capitalism and racial capitalism. So it is there. And if we can do the work, then we can show up as not just allies, but accomplices, comrades, and true friends.
Yes.
Thank you, Chinyere.
And I would say, just as we grapple with all of our roles in systems individually, I offer that my most clear analysis of my role is when I understand my relationship to the system. So I don't say for myself, my job as a cis queer Black woman is to dismantle the gender binary. That I say, I have a role in naming what the binary has done to affirm, and what part of our cultural bias that is a part of, in social, etc. And so I encourage also for us to move from just the concept that individually there are good types of people and bad types of people, and move more to a place where there are structures that have been designed that enact policy, norms, rules that impact people differently. Wherever you are in that impact is your privilege, is your relationship. Which means, as a light-skinned Black woman who some folks can experience as non-threatening, who identifies as the gender I was assigned at birth, I have a very specific relationship to a structure that other people, even other Black people, are more negatively impacted by. That helps me, because it helps me to see myself in it, and not just to think that it's so much bigger than me that I couldn't make a difference. And so that individual work is vital and should be evolving. And we are not alone. That's the beauty of movement. We are not alone in our dismantling of structures. We are not alone in reimagining new possibilities. And the less alone we feel, the revolution is part of the victory, that we continue to say that actually it's our engagement together that can rebuild.
Yeah. I want to jump in on this right quick and offer 3 pieces for our white allies who really want to show up. The system of capitalism has to be dealt with. And if you're watching this and hearing this in a comfortable space right now, able to self-shelter and still work from home, and all of these privileges that allow you to be okay right now. You know, it's time to recognize where you fit in society. There are millions of people who are not able to stay home, who are not able to be safe right now. And it's not just about a health system, it's about an economic system that does not invest in the safety and security of its own people. And that is the role of our government. For those who give donations and donors and philanthropists, we have to democratize these dollars that are made off the backs, the sweat, the violations of Black people, Black women. These dollars are, we shouldn't have to beg for what has already been taken from us. At this point, we need some courageous philanthropy. We need some courageous contributions to this movement that will save all of us. And, you know, my final statement is we really need folks who, and we learned this lesson in the aftermath of Katrina, and it's a tough lesson. You know, we had a lot of very loving, well-intended people coming down to the city of New Orleans, Biloxi, Gulfport to, quote, help out and be a part of the rebuilding. But there is a consequence for when white people move into spaces that Black people are trying to survive in. There's a consequence that happens there. We've got to pay attention to it. And the best place we can have our white allies working is in white communities. The problem is the policy problems are not necessarily coming out of the Black community. And the Movement for Black Lives policy table would say we need our white folks moving white people, and Black folks helping to really get Black folks into this work. But the change we need to see at this federal level will require all of our white allies in their own home communities, in their voting districts, to vote for Black lives, to vote for sustainable communities, to vote for climate solutions, not just show up in the inner city at a Black protest, right? Not just show up when you know you'll be called out for not showing up, but actually to show up in those elections, to show up in these policy advocacy spaces, and to show up in philanthropy in a way that supports the Black infrastructure, this movement infrastructure that's being built around the nation. I just want to shout out the Southern Movement Assembly. It's a group of 13 Southern states coming in, working together, and these are all frontline people. If you know that these folks are moving in the South for over 9 years, resource these folks. If you know folks in LA are redoing jails, resource those folks. If you know that people in the Pacific Northwest are changing the way we even think about the role of trees and water in our environment, resource these folks. We shouldn't have to beg. In fact, we should look up and just welcome you in because you're already at the door looking for how to support.
Yes.
Speaking of money, talk about the importance of donating to bail funds. Talk about what's happening to a lot of these protesters and others that are being crammed into jails, dangerous because of COVID, aside from everything else. Some of them are being held $50,000, $100,000 bails. Can you talk about that for a minute? Because we want people to contribute to the bail funds.
Right.
Yeah, so we are in a moment that we have not seen, like the panelists and Jane were talking about earlier, where we have people rising up in all 50 states. And we have also seen a level of intense repression, right? So people are being arrested, are cattled, are taken to jails, and very often are held for large amounts, right? There's no such thing as like a set bail amount for protests across the country or even across states. They are jurisdiction by jurisdiction, and the amount then can also vary widely. So there are some states that are doing cite and release, and there are a lot of states that are putting on at the highest amounts that they can. There are places in California that have bail amounts as high as $100,000 for one protester, right? So if we know that that is the case, and we know that there are people out there fighting for our lives, fighting for Black lives, and fighting to make this world a more just space, then it's time we need to use our money and our dollars to make sure that we get them out of jail, right? That we keep them safe and get them out of those cages that we know will only jeopardize their lives, in particular because of COVID. And then generally, because we know that jails are not places where we want our people to be. They should not be in cages when they are only addressing their First Amendment right to really stand up for Black people in this moment. So please, there are a list of bail funds that have been checked, have been verified by lawyers across the country. There are national ones and there are local ones. Please donate to bail funds. As if you are out there on the streets, you can donate. And if you are at home and you know that you can't get out there, we can donate and call our friends to donate as well.
Yes. And I have nothing to add because that was perfect, and would provide some immediate relief for movement organizations who are often burdened by judicial fees, et cetera. And I also want to name a long-term goals. We need to end cash bail. Our people are being held inside cages weeks, months, years for $50, for $100. I worked on a campaign that shook the world in 2018, and one of our organizers disappeared for 24 hours, and I could not find her. Turns out she was stopped by a police officer at a stoplight. They found that she had unpaid parking tickets and disappeared her for 24 hours until not only she paid all of her parking tickets, but a $1,800 bail. They refused to allow her to call her mother, etc. Think about that, to be disappeared, to have your life put in jeopardy at a stop sign for not waiting the 5 seconds that you need. Our people are being kidnapped because they are in poverty, and the system is utilizing cash bail to fill the beds that we don't need if we need people to stay in for $50, $100 bails, for missing a court date or being 5 minutes late, etc. And so I want us to also, this is structural. This is also where we say we show up now and we dismantle the structure in the future. And so engage with electeds where you live who are saying plainly, end cash bail. Look up the politics of your DA and other members of the judicial system where you live, both locally and nationally, and see where they stand on ending cash bail, and then demand it for where you live.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned DAs, because voting, we always think about, well, the Senate, right, the presidency, but the more you work on these issues like prison reform and so forth, the more you realize the importance of paying attention to who your DA is, who's the sheriff,
That's right.
Who are your board of supervisors. We have to really learn to pay attention to their records and how they stand on these kind of issues, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm just going to give a couple of frightening statistics. For me, in electoral work, we can kind of sometimes live at the symbolic level. We live at a representation level many times. What is fair about that is we have a long way to go from our elected positions really reflecting the multiracial, beautiful society that we live in. But also we know that that's not enough. It is not enough just to elect a woman or a Black person or a person from a marginalized community if they lack the analysis on the solutions that actually bring reprieve to our lives and a new vision. And so what I want to say here and hold those two things, which is that 97% of elected prosecutors are white in this country. 97%. A nearly similar number of sheriffs are white in this country. There are more millionaires in the US Congress than there are women. Of the 50,000 elected seats across the country, nearly 90% of those elected seats are occupied by white people, 65% white men, which when you take a map and zoom out, if we had a room of 100 people, only 4 women of color would be represented in that room in our current elected makeup. What's really important about that is that means the lived experiences of our folks aren't there. But many times also we stop there. And what I'm asking is that we actually all have a role in a couple of things. One is we can recruit candidates. In 2017, 3-Point Strategies worked with movement organizations in what we called uprising cities, or what were uprising cities, to recruit and elect new mayors. Those mayors aren't perfect. We're watching some of them lead now, and they're not perfect. What's different is they're willing to be held accountable to movement and to base building organizations in their imperfection. And what is possible when you find leaders who are not only reflect the identities of your communities, have shared lived experience, but also have analysis that could build the public policy and the budget, to come back to that, of your places, then that's where you get that transformational space where activists who are showing up with demands and solutions are met with an open door and a listening ear, so that we can create the change that is so required. And so DAs are going to be on your ballot. Elected prosecutors are going to be on your ballot. In November, you're going to have a chance to engage in ballot initiatives where you live. Take a look at all of those. It's public information. Go to your Secretary of State's website, your Board of Elections, and soon the Electoral Justice Project will have a website where you can actually take the vision for Black lives and look at the ballot where you live. And so stay tuned, stay up to date with us, and we promise you that we're going to work hard to really create a transparent electoral process as we move into November.
I wanna, yes, amen, and yes. I wanna add in a couple of other folks to think about in these upcoming elections. You know, the DAs are important. There are DA races happening across the country. It's important for you to look up these folks and see, as Jessica mentioned, their politics. It's important to know that, and ask them some hard questions. They should be able to answer it. It's an honorable position, but it carries a lot of duty, and we should you know, check them out. But I also want to mention the other things that are on people's ballots. You know, it's important to understand who your coroner is, if for no other reason to be able to get a deep understanding of how people are dying in your community. This is not something we should have to say, except, you know, the current moment shows us that even the determination of death requires you to have people that you can trust. In many places, this is an elected position. And we have Black doctors out there who can fill this role, and people who will be accountable to the community who can fulfill this role. And I also want to mention the Public Service Commission. These things aren't sexy. I know, coroner, Public Service Commission. But let me tell you something. There are very few people controlling your access to the sun, your access to water, your access to these basic things that somewhere in our history became privatized, even though the Lord made them. I don't know how we have to pay for access to things that you should have a natural right to, but here we are. And there's a Public Service Commission near you controlling your energy. They're going to actually up your energy bills, despite the fact that they got bailed out to keep the energy on. That we're going to feel the effects of people trying to make money off of this system, make money off of this moment. And we have to understand that these things translate into the ballot initiatives. We've got to start paying attention to these little races, the same way we pay attention to this presidency.
Thank you for that. I just want to say one thing very quickly. I've had the privilege of traveling a lot in the world, and I have been in countries as an actor making movies where I've noticed that everything feels different. There's no sharp edges. People are centered. You can tell that they're not scared. And invariably, when I get to the bottom of why this is so, it's because the people feel seen and heard and respected by the institutions that govern their nations. When you have that lack of racism, lack of injustice, when government and all institutions really respect their people, everything changes. You know, and that's what we have to work for. And I thank you all so much for touching on such profound issues. Jessica, Chinyere, Colette, bless you, thank you.
Thank you for your amazing questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Fight on, everybody. Fight on.
Merci, Jane. Fight
Let's
on.
stand together.
Join us.
Yes,
We will. Thank you. To all of you out there watching, please, I implore you, don't stay silent. Take your outrage and your grief and your privilege and use it to transform yourself and your community, and study. I read a lot about the history of racism and prisons and things like that, and it's helped me tremendously. And I've listed some of the books that have helped me the most. And those are listed across all social media. And call your elected officials, flood social media, have uncomfortable conversations with your friends and families and colleagues, and speak out when you hear or see racial microaggressions. And if you can take to the streets and join the demand for justice, do so, and join the movement in defense of Black lives. We're posting links across our social media platforms. Please take action. Follow the pages for the Movement for Black Lives. Don't stop fighting. Don't stop fighting until white supremacy is eradicated and systemic racism is wiped out. Thank you. And thanks again to our incredible speakers and to all of you out there who are fighting. I send you love and strength and power, and I'll see you next time.